Caretaker's Cottage at Grandview. Don't know if any of you had the opportunity to go there when they were doing some of the events to kick off the fundraising, but they had folks dressed up as people that are buried there and doing histories of them, and it was very interesting. You wouldn't know all of the interesting people that are in that cemetery. Linda's curator of Samara and the Frank Lloyd Wright House in West Lafayette. I'm sure we've all been there. And she's president of the West Lafayette Park Board and a member of the West Lafayette Library Foundation. She's also involved with the New Chauncey Housing Association, West Lafayette Tree Friends, and a founding member of CHIPS, which is the Community History Project Support. Kay is retired from Purdue Chemistry Department and has been involved in a lot of volunteer activities in retirement, including Samara, the Art Museum of Greater Lafayette, Master Gardeners, West Lafayette Tree Friends, Art on the Wabash, Art in Bloom, Lilly Nature Center, and also a founding member of CHIPS. I get a kick out of Art on the Wabash. I used to kid Bev Shaw when they were going to have that and they'd have a lot of rain. I said, is it going to be Art in the Wabash this year? So anyway, I turn this over to Kay or Linda.
You can't hear me if I talk like this? Okay. All right, well, thanks for having us. Linda and I have talked to a lot of service groups and women's clubs about this project, which we, this is the first time we've talked about it since the project has sort of stalled. Anybody who's gone down Salisbury recently has noticed what bad shape the cemetery cottage is in now. And but the city does have money. I believe the problem is that they're simultaneously trying to do a new city hall and a new rec center, which have kind of taken priority. And we're hoping, but we'll tell you a little bit about why we're involved and what. So this is how it looked originally, and these gates.
Keep the mic up.
These gates have disappeared. They were moved around to an old Grant Street entrance, which doesn't exist anymore. But this is how the cemetery looked originally. And it was designed to be like a park-like cemetery with no raised mounds. It was supposed to be, I mean, the advertising materials are kind of interesting to look at because it said instead of being a sad place like other cemeteries, this was going to be a happy place for you to have your loved ones.
What direction is that? Are you looking south?
This is looking right as, so we're on Salisbury now, looking right in where those mailboxes are, because 5 people live, or 5 houses back behind. It's right where the mailboxes are. Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know what direction, but yeah, it's right, it's the main entrance, the only entrance really right now for the cemetery. So we would love to find these gates and the arch, but we may be out of luck there. This cemetery was laid out by the same gentleman who laid out Highland Park, and there was a lot of controversy at the time. This was in 1900 because the neighbors thought they would rather have something like Highland Park there across the street from them instead of a cemetery. But at any rate, we have the cemetery. And I noticed in your songbook, the inside page has some "Hello Everybody" arranged by Marshall Hallenstein. And Marshall is in the cemetery. And he's on our
Good old Howie.
Our next cemetery walk, which is about artists and musicians. Do you want to say anything that all right? So this is what we have all driven by a million times over the years, and how it looked when we first embarked on this project. Go ahead. So in case you didn't remember what the cemetery's cottage was, that's what it looks like. And it's right next to the water tank. I have to admit, until the cemetery was, or until the cottage was about to be demolished, I had never paid any attention to it. However many times I've driven past, hadn't really made an impression on me. But I think we can go to the next one. It says, the next one. Oh, this is. I think this is the other. I think this is the old PowerPoint.
was the first one on the list.
Was it? Yeah, I think this is the old one. Well, anyway, so what happened was the cemetery was put on sale and the cottage, and the city briefly thought about buying both of them, but decided against buying the cemetery. The owners of the cemetery wanted to sell the cottage to developers to tear down and put a house or two on there, because housing is at a premium in West Lafayette, and they figured they could make some money off that. So the city stepped in and bought the cottage so that it wouldn't be demolished. And a committee was formed, which is what Linda and I are on.
Community Historic Project Support.
Doesn't really roll off the tongue, but we call it CHIPS.
I call it CHIPS.
And we started off with a big membership and a lot of different committees, research and fundraising and events and so on, and lots of enthusiasm and support from the city and a vibrant leader. And during the course of this, our support from the city left her job, our leader moved to another state, and we kind of foundered a little bit. But we had had a number of events, let's just go on. Once we had control of the cottage and looked inside, this is what we found. So nobody had used the cottage for many, many years, other than sometimes students, because there's a lot of bottles in there, and but it wasn't used by the cemetery owners or the people who mowed the lawn or whatever it was originally for. It hadn't been used for years. And we got inside and we saw all of this. It was dangerous to go in there. There's several of these. Damage in the basement, damage in the... And then this is how we didn't know until we got this drone picture exactly why there was so much damage there, but the two flat parts of the roof had completely caved in. So, so the first thing that they did was put tarps over that, and then they cleaned out, and I think the next one is the clean. Okay, keep going. Cleaned it out. Okay, so we got all of that cleaned out. On my other slide, it would say we then in 2018. We had another $100,000 from the city. The original estimate to fix it was $400,000, which I think was high. I think we'll get it done for less than that. But we started with $100,000. We started with the money the city gave us to buy the cottage, and then we got another $100,000. And the first step was to support the foundation to fill in the basement. So instead of the basement is not going to be used, it's been filled in, they took all the tiles off the roof to save the tiles and fix the roof and eventually put those tiles back. And that's where it ended. That's where it stands right now. So that's been a year since those, and Kettle had, we'll see the people later in the slide that did this, but, okay, so this is, I already told you that. And ultimately, the Caretaker's Cottage will be used to house, not to house the West Lafayette History Archives, but to have rotating exhibits from the archives, which are now stored in the basement of the West Lafayette Public Library.
Are you
and
all
can't be
familiar with
seen.
that? With the West Lafayette History and Research Center? Okay, it's,
That's because it's hidden in the
yeah,
library.
it is. It's hidden in the basement. So what we're doing is we're collecting memorabilia, like we have Sonia Marjorum's papers there. We have a bunch of, almanacs from the, what do you call those? Yearbooks from the high school and stuff like that. So we've got a bunch of
Menus from
papers.
restaurants that don't
Yeah.
exist anymore.
Yeah, menus from restaurants that don't exist anymore. Just anything like that. If you have anything, a collection of some sort that you think might be of value to us or worth saving, please take it to the West Lafayette Public Library if you're no longer using it, because we would love to have the opportunity to be able to display that, okay?
Nick Schenkel, the director of the library, feels very strongly that Lafayette's history is well represented and Purdue's, but West Lafayette kind of gets lost in the shuffle because of the prominence of Purdue. So that archive that Dale and Sonia started is to address that. And this would be a place to have exhibits from that archive, ultimately, when it gets finished. So what we have done is we had a lecture series, 3 lectures at Bruno's, and Bruno supplied the space, he supplied beer, he supplied pizza. We're hoping to have another one of those coming up. We wish we could announce it right now what the dates were so that you could know. But they were very well attended, they were sold out. The first lecture series was about the tank scraps, which, anybody ever hear of the tank scraps? Yes, okay, so the water tank is there, and in the, and I'll get this wrong, but 1900s maybe, that it was sort of like a hazing ritual between the freshman and sophomore class, and they
Literally fall.
got together and beat each other up, and whoever won the battle got to, claim the tank and write their year on it. And this went on for maybe 20 years until somebody died, and they ended that weird ritual. But it's so we had David Hovde talking about that at one of the lectures. We had somebody talking about Victorian mourning rites, which was really an interesting one, and another one about symbolism on tombstones. The other things that we've done have been mainly done by our research committee, which is Linda and me. Not Linda and me, Linda and me. Linda and I are on the research committee. We're not it. There's probably 8 of us. And so we had a cemetery walk. The first one was kind of a general one. It wasn't. It didn't have a theme like our other ones have. So we had some of the prominent people in the cemetery that we highlighted, and we've had, I think we had 7 people at the first one. I think the next slide shows what those were. Yeah, so these were the people on the first, yeah. And we all learned a lot. It's really a fun committee to be on because there's a lot of, I mean, everybody's got a story, but there's a lot of interesting stories, and there's about 4,400 people in the cemetery, and there's room for more if anybody is looking for a spot. It is a pretty cemetery. And so, for example, I researched Harry Leslie, who became a governor, and he doesn't seem to be very well remembered, even though his name is on a bridge and so on. But he was called the Immortal Boilermaker for being on the football team that crashed, and everybody died except him. They were on their way to play IU in Indianapolis in a wooden train, and a train came the other way, and so they thought everybody had died in that car, and I guess in the sort of makeshift morgue, Harry started twitching. So they decided not to put him into the ground right then. So, and he went on to an illustrious career as a governor and so on. So we have interesting people in the cemetery. Our second walk was, I don't know if we had a second lecture. No, we don't have where he said that. Yeah, our second walk was builders of the community, and it included Crockett, who was a partner with Arnett. It was the Crockett-Arnett Clinic originally. The Shook family, the Anderson-Smith family, Kettle Hut, and Kettle Hut has been a big help to us, the Kettle Hut Company. Marshall was a bridge builder, Peyton was the women's clinic, and Scholler was an architect, Strait was a church builder. So it was all, the theme of that one were people who had either physically built or in some other way built the community that we now live in. Our third walk was right before last Veterans Day, so it was the 100th anniversary of World War I, and there are about 150 World War I veterans in Grandview, and most of them died for other causes besides being in the war, but some of them died because of being gassed or more often getting pneumonia. But we also had one person in our cemetery, and his name is Carl Lark Horowitz, who became a prominent, apparently really got the physics department on the map at Purdue, and he fought for the other side. So we had one non-allied veteran in that. anyway, that was a fun walk. It was a beautiful day. We had a color guard and 21 gun salute and so on. And we had all of the 150 veterans' graves marked with their obituary and a flag. And then we featured several ones that had, for example, like Horowitz, who had something, a distinctive story to talk about. Our fourth walk, which was supposed to be this past May, and then weather didn't allow it, is going to be on the artists and musicians that are buried there. Some of them, some of the arts and music represented there. So there are photographers, and Marshall Hallenstein is there. Artists are there. The Wolliver family, who Peter Wolliver was really the photographer at Purdue, his family is there. So, so that's, again, we're hoping that happens. We're kind of waiting until the city shows us some goodwill and puts the tiles back up on the roof so that we think it's going to be protected for the winter. We're hoping that's going to happen. We have somebody that's working with the city to try to make that happen before winter. But I think the city would like to see this completed in 2020, but if it doesn't get started pretty soon, that is not going to happen. But yes.
Our own Bill Fall is buried there. 101-year-old Bill Fall.
Yeah,
Remember this
and
guy forever.
you probably all know a lot of people who are there. One of the families we're featuring on the upcoming Music and Art Walk is the Keller family. And Sam Keller was a businessman. His father was also a businessman, had the Raps cider shops, and before that, the Raps and Keller's shoes, and so on. And Sam's father, whose name I'm now forgetting, bought 10 plots in Grandview. And so I think they are in 8 of them now. But I work with Midge Keller, who is there, and some people would know Midge Keller or Alan Keller and so on. So he bought for the family when this cemetery first opened. So let's look at the sponsors, because the West Lafayette Redevelopment Committee provided the money to buy the house originally. These other ones have done some of the fill-in work and so on. Shelley Lowenberg DeBoer, who was our original chairman and moved to Montana, and we kind of lost some momentum. She came back, so now we're looking forward to her bringing the momentum back for us. Kettle Hut has been a big help, and really so has everybody that's listed there, so we appreciate all the sponsorship from local. Yes?
What will the interior look like?
The city is just going to finish it as a white box, and then it'll be up to the library, as I understand it, to decide how the displays are going to be done.
How many square feet will they have?
It's pretty small.
I'm gonna say 944.
Yeah, it's small. So it's not going to, it can't house the archives, but it can house small exhibits. Other questions?
Will there be parking for people who want to visit those exhibits?
They promised that we would have some parking, but there's not a lot of room for it. So I think it would be hard to have big events there. When we had, for the cemetery walks, people have parked down Highland or Carrollton. There is some access for handicap parking to come in the front of the cemetery. But there is a plan ultimately to have some parking by the cottage. Yes?
Why was it decided to resurrect the building in the first place?
Well, I think maybe you know the answer to that.
It is a prominent building in our community. Everybody's seen it, everybody knows it, we all like it, right? We wanted to save it because it's important, because it's just a vernacular building, nothing real special, but it shows part of our history. It talks about our history. Just by looking at it, you see our history. And then when we decided that we could have those exhibits in there, then it became obvious why we needed to save it, yeah.
The stonework,
It's
quite
fabulous.
attractive.
The stonework and the
red
tile,
yes.
the tile also, yes.
If you're gonna have exhibits in there, will they be left in there for periods of time?
They would, it's be rotating exhibits left for a period of time and then rotated out for something
Some kind
else.
of security be provided?
We'll have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going to be, air conditioned and heated, right?
And we'll have a restroom.
Yeah, we'll have a restroom.
And that's always a plus. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Other questions? Yes.
You might have already answered this question, but what was the building used for originally?
It was designed as the Caretaker's Cottage. And in that first slide, where the arch was, you could see a little building right through the arch, which was made in exactly the same style, but that one was taken down a long time ago. And that one was used for storage of bodies, if it was too cold in the winter to dig a hole, things like that. So, but that one's gone. The Caretaker's Cottage was originally used by the caretaker of the cemetery to live in, and then eventually it became used as a storage space for lawnmowers and things like that. And then when they didn't need that anymore, it was used for students to party.
Who has all the records of who's in the cemetery and the plot numbers and all that?
The owner of the cemetery is Steve Weston, Stephen Darcy Weston, yeah, and he's got all of that. And
Where is he?
well, he's is from a family that owns cemeteries. I think he's in Delphi.
Okay.
But, yeah, so this is something that we have been able to look at.
He shared that with us.
Yeah.
I have it on my phone. Which is insane, but you know, it's
Yeah,
kind of.
so we have a list of everybody who's there and where they are and so on. Yes.
In the beginning, I think you said this, but I forgot. What year was this cemetery established?
1900.
That was the first burial.
Yeah, the cottage was built in 1903. Yes.
Something just occurred to me that you'll need in that facility. What in the world are you gonna do about a restroom?
Oh, we'll have one.
You know,
Yeah.
outhouse? That would be historic, wouldn't it?
We only have to keep the outside historic. The inside we can change.
It had a bathroom in it. Yeah.
What had to have it?
Yeah, caretaker lived there. They could have had an outhouse, I guess, but. Any other questions? So we are hoping that, we were really hoping for a fall, getting back into the cemetery walk, the lecture series and so on, but we're waiting for Shelley to say the word when we can start publicizing. It may not be until spring, because we really want to get some action going on the cemetery on the cottage before we have more events there. Because right now, so I had 2 PowerPoints, and I forgot your name. Rodney. I told Rodney the wrong one. This was the old one. The new one had a lot of new information on it, and including all the things that had been done in the renovation, and there was something else I had in there that I wanted to show. But, I just lost my train of thought. Well, anyway, we are dedicated to seeing this project through, and CHIPS, that's our only project right now, but we are hoping in the future that the Sullivan Bank might be one of our projects, that we would be able to get the Sullivan Bank.
Do you know what that is?
No.
The Chase Bank down in,
Village?
yeah, it's a little triangular,
Yeah, the Chase
built
Bank
by
in the Village. It's
Louis
one of-
Sullivan.
It's one of his 8 jewel box banks. It is the smallest one and is the least expensive one, but it sure is pretty special. Where that ATM machine is, that was where the front door was. And then look at that beautiful terracotta all around it. And if you look up, you'll see these medallions that are very Sullivan-esque. So go look at it with new eyes now. It's a very, very special building, definitely. Yeah.
Yes, we'd like to get the ATM.
Yeah.
And
That's
Chase
all.
sign off.
Yes.
Yeah. So we hope that there'll be ongoing needs for chips.
Yeah.
Send us information.